angelica, anise, caraway, carrots, celery, celeriac, chervil, coriander / cilantro, cumin, dill, fennel, lovage, parsley, parsnip. All of these lovely plants are cousins. They're all part of the Apiaceae plant family, which is the second plant family that we are going to talk about in this little mini series all about the various plant families. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Growing Space podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk all about these little baby plants and just talk through all the ins and outs of growing them at home. I have also made a decision about this little mini series that I'm doing. I think this might be a little bit of a recurring series for this year. In leading up to the spring growing season, we're going to focus this series on our cool season plant families. And then once we get closer to the summer growing season, we will talk about the summer plant families. I have at least 3 more plant families that I want to cover before spring gets here so that you feel equipped with some new information about some of the edible plants that we can be growing at home. So we'll consider the spring portion of the plant family series to be complete with 5 episodes. So I think it's going to be great. It's really helpful to understand which plants are related because that helps you understand and anticipate certain issues or certain growing patterns or habits, especially when you're growing things that you haven't grown before. You know, I don't know if you've grown caraway, for example, at home, but maybe you've grown dill. And, because now that you know, I mean, not in great detail, but you will know in great detail by the end of today's episode that these 2 plants are related. If you've grown dill, then you have a little insight as to what caraway could look like as it's growing. I am so glad that you're here. Let's get started talking all about, it's a hard word to say, you guys. It's a hard one to say. Apiaceae. Apiaceae. Apiaceae? Anyway, here we go. Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvest, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's resource library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership. The Apiaceae plant family is also known as the umbellifers or the umbelliferae family. Also not an easy word to say in Latin. This plant family consists of a group of flowering plants, very aromatic plants. They usually have hollow stems and deep taproots, which is not terribly surprising if you think of like a parsnip and a carrot belonging to this family. Also, if you've ever pulled up a really mature parsley plant, you've probably seen some massive taproots on your parsley. And now you know it's because they're related to carrots. But they are very aromatic. They have hollow stems, long, deep taproots. And when they go to flower, The term umbellifer or umbel refers to this like flattened crown of flowers that form in a cluster at the very top of the plant. I think it would be fairly easy for most of us listening to this podcast to think about Queen Anne's lace, the wildflower that you see pop up on the side of the road. You can identify that fairly easy because of those large circular clusters of flowers that form at the tippy top of the plant in kind of like this flat, almost like a saucer shape, right? So that is very characteristic of this plant family, the umbellifers. And like I said, like those clusters of flowers at the top are known as umbels. Whenever I see the word umbellifer, I always think of umbrella. Just in like looking how the words are written, there's a lot of similarities, But whenever I see the word umbellifer, I think umbrella, and that helps me picture that flower cluster shape and be able to associate that with Queen Anne's lace. And then I know that Queen Anne's lace is related to carrots and celery and dill and parsley and all of those. And so that's how I remember who belongs to that plant family. So if that helps you, there you go. The plant family itself contains, just like the brassicas, contains 3,700 different species. Isn't that crazy? Just like with the brassicas, not all of these species are edible, but this is another like fairly large plant family with a lot of edible members. So this is a very fragrant plant family. One of the things I love most about harvesting carrots fresh out of your growing space in your backyard, on your patio, is the smell. For sure, I know it makes me sound crazy. I like to smell my carrots. What a weirdo. But have you ever smelled freshly harvested carrots? And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, heck yeah, I have, and they smell delicious, then you get it. And if you haven't, then you just need to, because you're missing out. There are certain vegetables or certain crops that when you grow them at home, it just ruins you in the best possible way, of course, but it ruins you for anything that you could ever buy at the store. One of those for me, hands down, this will come as no surprise, are tomatoes, right? Like a homegrown tomato, you just can't beat it. It's really hard for me to enjoy a store-bought tomato because I don't know. They're just not good. They're not juicy. They're not flavorful. The texture is weird. In the similar vein, a homegrown carrot. Oh my gosh. There's just nothing like it. And it starts with the smell. It's just so good. It's so good. There you go. That's your invitation. Let's have a carrot party. Grow some carrots. Smell them when you harvest them. Anyway, so something really interesting about this plant family, the Apiaceae family, that's different than the Brassicaceae family, is that the Apiaceae family actually has a decent number of perennial herbs in it. So again, just a reminder, perennial plants are plants that return either year after year or season after season, or they remain evergreen. And this plant family, like I said, it has a decent amount of edible perennial plants. Anise, lovage, and some types of fennel, like a bronze fennel. Oh my gosh, bronze fennel is gorgeous. You should look up a picture of bronze fennel. I use it as an edible landscaping plant, and it's just stunning. I mean, it doesn't have like the bright green, frondy, feathery stalks on it like traditional fennel does. But instead, it's like this purpley / like bronzy brown color with like various shades and hues. And it's really just a fascinating plant. And then when it goes to bloom, it blooms these bright yellow umbels, right? Now you know what an umbel is. So bright yellow umbels on the very top of the plant. It's stunning. But anyway, so bronze fennel, anise, and lovage are perennial plants. So that means that the plant itself dies back. In this case, the plant will die back in the fall and winter, and then the same plant comes back in the spring and through summer. Now, there are also some biennial plants that are part of the Apiaceae family. Carrots are biennial. Celery is biennial. Let's see, who else? Parsley is biennial. So carrots, celery, and parsley are all biennial members of the Apiaceae family. And so that means, because they're biennial, that means that the same plant will grow for 2 years. And in its second year, it will produce a seed. And then that plant will release its seed and die back for those seeds to find a cozy little spot in the soil to regrow the next time, it's the season for them. So biennials are kind of cool in that they act like perennials while they're growing, but within 2 years, that plant is going to die and reseed. But it's really nice to have like fresh parsley and to be able to harvest carrots pretty much year round. Now, even though a carrot and celery, even though these are considered biennial, you don't really want to wait 2 years to harvest them because of how the energy transfers throughout the plant. So when we were talking about brassicas last week, I was talking about how broccoli has really large leaves in order to pull in all of this energy and direct the energy towards the florets or its little buds. Similarly, with the Apiaceae family, let's use a carrot for an example. So a carrot is going to use its little carrot tops to pull in energy from the sun, convert it into sugar, store that sugar and energy in its long taproot so that in its second year, it can pull from that energy to create its flower. If you wait more than, I would say, 6 months to harvest your carrots, then the plant potentially is going to start pulling the energy from the root, which of course is the part that you want to eat. It's going to start pulling that energy into the stalk and then eventually up to the flower top. And as it does that, the root is going to become a bit more bitter and potentially more fibrous. Plants definitely change their flavor profile and their texture depending on where they are in their life cycle. Like you want to harvest those when the roots are as big as they're going to get, which is usually 3 to 4 months after you see the seed germinate and before the plant has a chance to like pull on those energy stores to create seed. But a lot of the remaining edible members of this family, like caraway and coriander or cilantro, fun fact, coriander and cilantro are the same plant. Yep. I know. Mind blown. They're annuals. So is cumin and dill and like more traditional, like bright green fennel is an annual. These plants grow for 3 to 4 months and then produce a seed, which is very evident. And then diving, if you listen to last week's episode, your ideal planting time for spring is going to be like the first half of March. And then you can also plant these plants again in the fall before mid-September. One thing about cilantro that I'll just call out now, actually a couple of things. Cilantro does not like the heat at all. It does not like warm weather. It gets stressed out very easily. So anytime an annual plant feels stressed due to temperature, its natural reaction is to quote unquote bolt or go to seed. And in the case of cilantro, which is so tricky because we think of cilantro when we think of like making a fresh salsa, which maybe we want to do in the summertime when our tomatoes are ready, or like maybe you're going to pair like fresh homegrown cilantro with something kind of spicy and you want to use your homegrown peppers, which grow in the middle of summer. Yeah, it's challenging because cilantro does not want to grow then. It just doesn't. It gets really unhappy. And when it gets unhappy, it gets a really woody, stalky center. From that woody, stalky center is where the flower is going to form. And so it pulls all of its sweetness and all of its tenderness away from its leaves to feed the seed head. One benefit of allowing your cilantro to go to seed is that you get coriander seed. Coriander seed is the seed of a cilantro plant. And I don't know about you, but anytime I've had the opportunity to purchase coriander seed, in the spice aisle or, maybe at a bulk herb store, of course, it's going to be dry coriander seed. It's never fresh coriander seed. And what a delight to have fresh, juicy coriander seed to add to your dish or your meal, or I don't know, just snack on it. What a treat. If you do get some bolted cilantro, maybe you embrace the opportunity to sample fresh coriander seed, because that's something that most people just don't get the chance to experience unless you grow it yourself. So perennials, biennials, annuals, it's all represented here in the Apiaceae family. When it comes to specific nutrients that these little plants need, most of them are going to need a balance of nitrogen in the soil and phosphorus. Last week, we talked about nitrogen and it being one of the macronutrients that our plants need. Nitrogen helps to feed all of the green parts of the plant. It helps the plant photosynthesize. So whenever you're eating the leaves of a plant, think nitrogen. I need to make sure I have plenty of nitrogen. So in the case of the Apiaceae family, your celery is going to benefit from a decent amount of nitrogen in the soil. Your cilantro, your dill, your fennel, parsley, lovage, those are all going to crave a little extra nitrogen. Now, another macronutrient that all plants need to grow and thrive is phosphorus. And depending on which edible members of this plant family you're growing, you may need to add some phosphorus to your soil. Phosphorus is the nutrient that tells plants to do two things. Phosphorus will tell a plant to create a seed. So if you are looking to grow anise or caraway or cumin, fennel, dill, specifically for their seeds, then you're going to want to make sure that you have phosphorus in your soil, because it's going to help the plant do what you want it to do and create those seeds that you can then harvest. Seeds, of course, are found in flowers and in fruit. So later on, when we talk about the summer vegetables, we'll talk more about phosphorus, because a lot of summer vegetables are fruiting vegetables, right? And need a balance of phosphorus, but we'll get there in time. Phosphorus, it helps the plant create seed, but it also tells the plant to create strong root systems. So if you're growing your carrots, right? If you're growing parsnips, even like fennel, like the bulbs of fennel can really benefit from having a little extra phosphorus in the soil. So how do you add phosphorus to your soil? Of course, there's tons of products out there. So I encourage you, to play around to find the product or the source of phosphorus that you feel is most supportive for your space or most effective for your space. My two favorite sources of phosphorus are bone meal and rock phosphate. Now, bone meal is exactly what it sounds like. It is sterilized, crushed bone, which honestly is a great outlet for meat producers, large scale meat producers who are left with certain parts of animals that would otherwise go to waste. Bone meal is a great way of diverting that waste into something that's productive and that could be helpful. So I really appreciate that about the product of bone meal. Now, because it is animal derived, if you have any hesitation around using animal products, maybe you're part of a vegan household or vegetarian or have another objection to using bone meal, I will say that this option is not my first go-to. It's a great product, but I have 3 dogs. As you might imagine, bone meal is incredibly appealing to dogs, but they love it and they'll eat it. And that's not pleasant for anyone, really. Yeah. So I tend to not use bone meal for that reason, but it is a great product and a great source of phosphorus. The other one, like I mentioned, is rock phosphate. Rock phosphate is not animal derived. It's a mineral form of phosphorus. It's very clean. It's very safe to use. And it does not attract my dogs. I can put rock phosphate out and they are just like totally not interested in it at all, which for me is great. And it, like I said, it's a great source of phosphorus and will amend your soil just as well as the bone meal. Sometimes you can get like a crushed rock phosphate, and then other times it's kind of like pelleted. The smaller the particle, the more readily it can dissolve and mix in with the water that's in your soil and become available to your plants. But those are the two different sources of phosphorus that I like to use. So when it comes to planting the members of the Apiaceae family, more times than not, I prefer to direct seed these plants. And that is, just taking seeds and planting them directly in the soil where they're going to grow. Let me just go down the list really quickly. I think that might be more helpful. So with anise, I would probably seed that. Same goes for caraway and celery and celeriac. Celeriac or celery root is a root vegetable. And like I mentioned last week with the radish and turnips, I have more success when I just direct sow my root vegetables. So celeriac, I would direct sow. Obviously, like a carrot, I would direct sow. Coriander/cilantro, I direct sow that because it grows so fast. Plus, like being in a small pot can stress cilantro, which can lead to like premature bolting. I have found, it's not like official research, but in my experience, I have found that transplanting cilantro leads to premature bolting. Maybe that's not your experience and you like transplanting cilantro. Go for it. Cumin, I would direct sow. Dill, for sure, direct sow. Fennel could be direct sow or use a seedling. Lovage, I would use a seedling because it's perennial. Parsley, I would also say is kind of like fennel. Like you could direct sow that or you could use a seedling. And parsnip, I would direct sow because it's a root vegetable. Another great thing about this plant family is most of these plants are pretty compact. So they don't take up a whole lot of space horizontally. Most of their growth is going to be up and down, either like tall, wispy, frondy arms reaching up, getting ready to open up into those beautiful umbels full of flowers, or long, deep taproots down in the soil. But for the most part, these plants are long and narrow, which means they do exquisitely in small spaces. So if you have just like a little pocket in one of your raised beds and you want to drop a few celery seeds, or you want to drop some dill, or maybe a little bundle of parsley, it can fit in nicely in tight spaces. And that, of course, translates to containers as well. Now, something to keep in mind whenever you're sowing or growing something that has a deep taproot in a container is that you want to make sure that container has plenty of drainage so that those taproots, they're not getting like suffocated, which a little dramatic, but they're not getting like suffocated or drowned, or there's plenty of oxygen and airflow in your soil. We don't always think about the fact that our soil needs to have air or the ability of oxygenating, or it needs to be an aerobic environment. But yeah, plants definitely love that exchange of air and gas. So making sure that you have great drainage in your containers if you're growing root veggies in pots. And then the other thing is to make sure that you have enough soil depth in your container to support that taproot development. You don't want to sow carrots or parsnips in a container that is only like 6 inches deep, because you're going to limit that taproot depth. Those are the two biggest things whenever you're sowing root veggies in pots, is to make sure you have plenty of drainage and aeration in the soil, and that your container is deep enough. I'm not usually a huge proponent of using terracotta. I'm mentioning it here for the same reason that I'm not a huge fan of them. You have to find the container that's right for you and right for what you're growing. But terracotta is great for carrots and things with long taproots because the sides of the container are porous, right? Terracotta, it's a clay. It breathes from all sides and angles. So that helps keep your soil nice and oxygenated. You're not trapping moisture in the container itself. So terracotta is great for spring and fall planting, but because it's porous, you get that loss of moisture from the top, the sides, the bottom, everywhere. It can be a little frustrating trying to grow something in the summertime here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have blistering summers. You can actually get heat stress on your plants in the summertime because the terracotta doesn't hold in enough moisture, and you'll find yourself watering a lot. So most of these plants do really well in containers, really well in small spaces. Another thing to keep in mind is that some of these crops only offer one harvest per plant. So in this case, I'm really speaking to those root vegetables, the celeriac, the parsnip, carrots, obviously. Like once you harvest that plant, you pull the taproot, that plant is done producing for you. So keep that in mind. If you have a small space, but you really love carrots and you really want to grow a lot of carrots, maybe you do a couple of staggered plantings just to make sure that you get some longevity in terms of your harvest window and your harvest availability for those different crops. So celery is also something that you generally get one harvest from because you harvest the whole bundle and then that's it. Fennel also, like celery, because you're growing a bulb of fennel, anise, caraway, cumin, and plants that you're most likely cultivating for their seed. Let those plants grow and thrive. And then once they're fully mature, then they'll create their umbel flowers. And within those flowers is where their seed will be. And you can harvest the seed then. Those crops usually take a little bit longer to get your full harvest from. Now, when it comes to cilantro, dill, lovage, and parsley, these herbs are great because these are all cut and come again crops. And once they're of a certain height, usually I say between 8 to 12 inches for these. Once they're about that tall, you can literally come in and you can cut the whole plant down, like the whole little bundle, and it will regrow. It's like magic. For those reasons, growing cilantro, dill, lovage, and parsley are great for small spaces because you get multiple harvests from the same plant over and over again. This plant family is one of my favorites because they're some of the most resilient plants to pest issues or pest pressure, which can be really refreshing, I must say. So they make great companion plants for that reason. So if you kind of mix these in and amongst other plants, you can practice a little bit of companion planting. One kind of heads up on this plant family and a kind of cool, depending on your perspective, I think it's awesome. But this relationship between plants in the Apiaceae family and the eastern swallowtail butterfly. And usually I see the swallowtails in like late summer, and they're really beautiful little caterpillars. They almost look like monarchs, but they don't have quite the uniform striping. Like their pattern is a little more complex than a monarch caterpillar's. And they don't have those cute little antennas that monarch caterpillars have. Ugh, meh. They do have a unique relationship with members of the Apiaceae family in that it's their main diet. Yeah. So I usually plant extra parsley in the spring just for the swallowtails. They'll come and visit your plants. They'll eat some of your plants. Depending on how much you have available and how many of them there are, you might really be sharing your harvest with the caterpillars. But then they move on and they go about their business and they turn into butterflies. And the butterflies, they're pollinators, right? And so they don't eat those plants. They instead eat nectar from flowers, which is so lovely. And we love them for that. But, it's just for like, I don't know, maybe like 3 to 5 weeks where you get to share your Apiaceaes with the swallowtails. And I think that's just a wonderful event to witness and just know that you're supporting pollinators while also growing some delicious aromatic plants for yourself. So that is your full rundown of the Apiaceae family. Like I said, I will put some links in the show notes. Next week, it might be a little bit of a shorter episode, but we are going to talk about the Asteraceae family. This is a delightful family. It's one of my favorite. I feel like I say that every week, but it's a really wonderful plant family. There's a lot of beautiful flowers that are part of the Asteraceae family that you can eat or that have medicinal benefits. So next week, it might be a little bit of a shorter episode, but we're going to talk about them. And then we are going to do the legumes, so the Fabaceae family and the rose family. Right, so if you've listened to previous episodes, or maybe this is your first episode, I like to close out each episode of the Growing Space podcast with either a fun fact or helpful tidbit or piece of information. I have this board that is in my office that I use for like different events that I do in person when I have a table or like a little information booth or something. It's just like a fun, easy, interactive activity. It's called Seed Bingo. Yeah, it's very cute, but it's essentially like a little bingo board that I made with a bunch of different seed packets on it. And this comes to mind because there are quite a few Apiaceae plants represented on the Seed Bingo. I have parsley and I have carrot and I have parsnip and I have cilantro. It is pretty fascinating. Like if you have the chance, maybe you have some seeds lying around, or like maybe this spring when you go to plant, to take a couple of packets from seeds of the same plant family and open them up. You don't have to take the seeds out, but you certainly can. Just don't mix them because that's a little. But if you pour them out or you just look down in the packet and you compare and contrast, but you compare the similarities of the different seeds, I think you'll be pretty amazed. I also have fennel on here. Oh my gosh. The Apiaceae family is well represented on Seed Bingo. And when you look at these different seeds, it's just so fascinating to see the parallels and the similar characteristics that are represented just on the seed. So there you go. Your little motivation ending this episode is to go stare at some seeds. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you again next week. So this year I wrote an entire planning calendar called Growth. It's filled with 52 weeks of intentions, reminders, and advice for growing food at home in 2024. I will put a link to this in the show notes. And if you are interested in grabbing my calendar, it's just $35. And it's a digital resource where you'll be able to receive a weekly intention, a weekly reminder, or piece of advice from me throughout all of 2024. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Growing Space podcast. I hope you enjoyed all of the content that was shared and that you're leaving today's episode with some new information to take to your very own growing space. As I mentioned throughout the show, more information is tucked into the show notes. If you look below the episode on whatever platform you are listening to this episode on, you will find those show notes linked below for your continued learning and education. I hope you tune in to next week's episode. I release new episodes every Tuesday. We'll see you again next week.